If you were on Tumblr in 2013, there's a good chance that you're familiar with Welcome to Night Vale. If you've been on Tumblr at any point after that, you've probably at least heard of it. But what isn't talked about as often as the show itself is the fact that it kicked off the modern indie audio drama movement, a movement that is globe-spanning, overwhelmingly queer, and constantly evading the shadow of large corporations. And today I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. I've talked to a lot of people about this project. I try to get almost everyone I talk to listen to the Magnus Archives, but overwhelmingly the question that I get asked again and again is, what is an audio drama? If you're here, you probably already know, but just in case, I'm going to give a brief overview. If you've ever listened to an old radio play, those are audio dramas. They are stories that are told entirely through audio, primarily consisting of dialogue and sound effects. Some will have a little bit of narration, but that's generally a small part of the overall show. These shows are also often called fiction podcasts. Not all audio dramas are referred to as fiction podcasts. From personal observation, I've noticed that generally shows that are part of a big franchise or company are referred to exclusively as audio dramas. All the shows I'm going to be talking about today, though, are referred to as fiction podcasts. In 2023, fiction podcasts were listed as the 15th most popular genre of podcast. In that study, there were only 19 genres listed in total, so suffice it to say, they aren't that popular in the grand scheme of things. If you mention audio dramas or fiction podcasts to a random person on the street, chances are they're not going to have any idea what you're talking about. If you're lucky, they might be familiar with like those Doctor Who audio dramas, or maybe a show by a big company like Q-Code. If you're incredibly lucky, they're just as chronically on Tumblr as you are, and they're familiar with Welcome to Night Vale, maybe the Magnus Archives, and if you're incredibly lucky, maybe a show like Malevolent. Shows like the Magnus Archives and Welcome to Night Vale aren't made by a big studio. They're produced independently of big companies and actors, which is a large part of what makes them so special. The current indie audio drama scene really kicked off in 2012 with the creation of Welcome to Night Vale. Welcome to Night Vale follows Cecil Palmer, the host of a local community radio show, and through that radio show we learn about how weird the town of Night Vale is. Night Vale is a town where there's a miniature city underneath Lane 6 of the bowling alley, it's illegal to mention that angels exist, and there is a glow cloud that is the president of the school board. In July of 2013, the show exploded. It had been spreading via word of mouth on Tumblr for a while, and it soon became a pinnacle of culture on the site. I had the absolute pleasure of talking to one early fan of the show, who goes by Skullbearer online. He originally got into the show after seeing a comic that was posted on Tumblr.
I still remember the art. It was phenomenal. It was the opening of the second episode of Welcome to Night Vale, that the desert seems vast, almost endless, but scientists tell us that somewhere even now there is snow. Done with as a sort of comic book style of a night a sort of desert city at night with like dogs running along the streets, quite very, very spooky. And then the last scene was Cecil sitting at his radio desk, speaking into the microphone. And I just saw that and I thought, what is this? This looks incredible. And started listening to it, loved it.
In 2013, Skullbearer and his friend Joey went to London MCM. There they cosplayed as Cecil and a hooded figure, and they also passed out flyers promoting the show. Those flyers had art that was commissioned from that same artist who made that comic that originally got Skullbearer into the show. Welcome to Night Vale was the first really big name in this space, but it was followed in 2016 by the Magnus Archives. The Magnus Archives is a podcast distributed by Rusty Quill and licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike 4.0 International License, and both it and the Rusty Quill are two of the biggest names in the space at the moment. The main character, Jonathan Sims, who shares a name with the writer of the show and his voice actor, is the head of the Magnus Institute, an institute dedicated to researching and recording paranormal events. The show follows John as he begins reorganizing the archives, chronicling his findings via tape recorder as he slowly begins to realize that there might be something bigger going on than he originally thought. The show grew a ton throughout its run, ending in 2021 with a huge audience and fan base. Once again, the fandom was largely concentrated on Tumblr, but it had also spread to other platforms, such as Discord. Like Welcome to Night Vale before it had spread primarily via word of mouth. While Welcome to Night Vale and the Magnus Archives do have a lot of similarities when it comes to their rise to fame and the communities around their shows, there is still one key difference between them.
I've heard Night Vale before, and I really liked it, but I didn't come out of it thinking I can do this. Like, it's like a very good production, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure with some work I could do that. But with Magnus Archives, it has like such a like I not like low quality, but as by design. Like it's very
Mm.
much like found footage. Like the way that found footage horror is very easy to get into, and you can make really brilliant stuff with like less material. Similar in the audio drama space, the Magnus Archives made me go, I would love to do something like this.
I do just want to be clear that these shows, especially Magnus, were preceded by a large number of other shows. However, they have had the largest impact both on the fandom and creative sides of these communities, which is why I've sort of centered them in this narrative. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the Magnus Archives was just starting its 5th and final season. This, combined with the pandemic, meant that a lot more people were sitting at home consuming media and had a lot of time on their hands, and so they were inspired to start their own shows. While some people like to pool were directly inspired by existing shows, Harlan Guthrie wasn't, but he was still able to take advantage of that community that had built up around other existing shows. Guthrie was a general manager at a water cooler company for 10 years before being let go due to the pandemic. Prior to this, he had been streaming role-playing games on YouTube every week. Out of work, he turned his focus to making a more polished final version of these streams, called Dice Shame.
As I was releasing it and had all this free time, I thought, well, you know what? Maybe I should make something else, a little extra. So I created a 9-minute short that ended with a choice, kind of like a choose your own adventure novel or whatever, and about a protagonist who didn't have sight and a voice in his head. And I showed it to some friends and some fans, and they were like, oh, this is pretty cool. And then I released it to the Patreon, which had like 5 people. And I was like, hey guys, why don't you decide what happens next?
The reception of this project was overwhelmingly positive, and eventually a bunch of those little shorts were stitched together and released to the public. This story was originally called Blinded, but eventually became what we now know as Malevolent. Guthrie has a background in film production, but the majority of creators in the space don't have that kind of production experience. The medium is incredibly accessible to new creatives. Beyond not having a visual component, there are tutorials for everything you could possibly need to know on YouTube. Even decent equipment is becoming really easy to come by, and it's a lot cheaper than it used to be. You could probably make a show entirely on your phone at this point if you really wanted to. This has allowed a large number of people to make their way into this creative space without years of schooling or already having a large following on social media.
It's so accessible that really anyone can do it. And when I say that, I truly mean anyone can do it. There is no right way to make an audio drama. Everyone has to start somewhere. And the majority of people start with just kind of a shitty mic in a closet or wherever.
I want to preface this by saying I've never got a show published myself, and all the information I have on this I got from doing a few interviews and doing a little bit of internet searching. Of course, if I got anything blatantly wrong, feel free to correct me, and if there's any information you'd like to add, go ahead and do that as well. Part of the appeal of fiction podcasts and podcasting in general is that it's fairly easy to access monetization via hosting platforms such as Acast. It's not always a ton of money, and it isn't accessible to everyone, but it is there and it is possible to get to it. Beyond that, after the Magnus Archives blew up, the Rusty Quill started the Rusty Quill Network, which is a network designed to help promote the shows of people new to the scene and help them access monetization. High Nay, Malevolent, Soul Operator, and The Grotto are all shows that are part of the Rusty Quill Network, and as such, they get access to a few benefits that other shows don't.
Basically, having a network like Rusty Quill or any other like big network will help you continue. Either they will pay you directly, and Rusty Quill pays us in ads, but not like directly. We just like however much we earn, we get. But either that's one way monetarily. The second way is access to an audience, an inbuilt audience. And third is just like, getting to more people, just like their belief in us makes us know that we are worth continuing.
Beyond the formal relationship of show and network, there's also some corners of the community that go really deep and contribute immensely to the creative effort. One example of this is Skeptor's work with Mike LeBeau, who played Timothy Stoker in the Magnus Archives. Through avenues like Discord, many creators and voice actors have been able to establish relationships. These can have direct benefits in the space, but it also leads to a community that's more focused on collaboration than competing for the most listeners. Skeptor told me about how creators will sometimes do ad swaps with other shows to promote their show on a friend's show and vice versa. If you hear a creator themselves reading an ad for a show, there's a good chance they really believe in the project and want to see it succeed. Really, people just want to tell cool stories and are more than willing to help other people out. A lot of people make podcasts due to this low bar of entry and because it can be a pretty easy way to make a little bit of money for something that you made. When I'm talking about monetization, I'm talking about ads and sponsorships that play at the beginning and at the ends of episodes. Oftentimes how that'll work is those companies will pay hosting platforms, who will then sometimes pass a little bit of that money on to creators to have their ads played on the show. But while it can be easy to access, it's often far from lucrative. And because of this, show creators often turn to other avenues to make a little bit of money to help support them and their shows. The biggest of these that is used almost completely across the board is Patreon, where creators will ask for a small donation every month from fans and in exchange give them access to things like exclusive content.
Like, a lot of people want to support independent work, especially independent work that they love. Especially now that a lot of the mainstream sources, your Netflixes and your like other streamers, have started dropping the ball on creating shows that people like can get invested in because they're just canceling them left and right. So a lot of people have caught on to the fact that you can support a show even for just a tiny amount of money, especially like think in the indie space.
Like I mentioned before, these shows generally aren't really affiliated with huge names or companies, and not having a big company that's going to come in and take away a bunch of your profit is a huge appeal to both fans and creators. However, once again, it also makes it a little bit hard to make a decent amount of money. And even when shows do manage to make some money, oftentimes that has to go right back into the show, paying actors and covering other expenses.
No one is really making a profit in the audio drama space. And I think a lot of that is because we haven't quite broken into that same space that actual plays and YouTubers have, where they get sponsorships and ads and that sort of thing. So I would love to see more of that slowly make its way into the space so that people can be more intentional about the money that they are able to make in the space.
At the same time, there's been a trend in recent years of money from ad sponsorships decreasing across the board. This has been largely noticed by people who are making content on places such as YouTube, but it's being noticed by other people as well. And to say the least, this is a huge problem. Beyond that, there have also been a few other concerns that have been raised by people in the space.
But I would be surprised if it doesn't get harder to get a show published, just because podcasting is so Wild West right now. Like, I could make an account and upload something for free, which is kind of I'd be surprised if you don't see it start getting a little bit more. Unfortunately, it start getting a little bit more monitored and a little bit more difficult, which I think is unfortunate. But I think that you'll see more things like, Rusty Quill's obviously huge and they're helpful. I imagine it'll go more that direction.
Even right now, we can see that there are a decreasing number of hosting platforms that are allowing people to post their content for free, and many are requiring a subscription in order to access their services. And with ad money decreasing, this can make it even harder to get a show off of the ground. But it's not all doom and gloom either.
Commercially, it continues to be really hard out there, but that's true kind of all podcasts. I think it's going to be more about the community and the art of it. But I think people are continuing to do really interesting stuff.
I think that indie art will always be able to thrive in its little corners. And even though, big companies have more resources than we do, they can do more than we can faster a lot of the time. People like indie shit. And the people who like indie shit are the kind of people that I am trying to write for. And I kind of think that your people are going to find you, but I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. I think that there will always be room for small art in the same way that people still go to $7 punk shows and people still, buy games from Steam that cost $4 and are the best thing you've ever played that no one's ever heard of. I think that there's always going to be room for indie productions because we make room for ourselves.
With a strong hope for the future of fan-supported content and communities that show no sign of slowing down, hopefully these unique stories and spaces will be able to continue to support themselves for years to come. And really, these communities show no sign of slowing down. Anyone who's been involved with fandom very much knows that sometimes they can be really special communities.
When people are passionate and attracted to the show and the concept and share that and share their positive message and their tattoos and their, you know, framed quotes and their art, it makes me feel so not alone. You know, it makes me feel like this, that we're all kind of, it sounds very like frilly, but like we're all connected in a way where like there are people out there that also are attracted to hope, I guess is the idea, where it's like, man, I got this.
And there are more people finding these shows every day. I only really got into the Magnus Archives this summer when I was working on a really awful assembly line job. I'd had a few friends recommend it to me before, and I only started listening to it a whole 3 years after the show ended. And since then, I've also gotten a few other people to listen to it, and they've gotten some people to listen to it. And really, that's just building on how these shows have always spread, via word of mouth and community. And as more people find them, more and more people will be led to this welcoming community and the lovely stories that go along with them. Part of the reason that shows do spread this way, beyond MIDI not having anything even resembling a marketing budget, is that they are inherently very queer. And when these stories tell our stories that are often ignored by mainstream media, people tend to flock to them. And then they tell their friends, hey, here's this piece of media that has really good representation, and then other people listen to it that way.
Having canon gay characters in 2013 wasn't a thing that happened. Not really. It's really only recently. Well, I mean, in Welcome to Night Vale, also Steven Universe, which was also happening at the time. Those were very much sort of vanguards of, hey, we have a gay character, and the like not and it hit that beautiful middle spot between this is not a gay show, this isn't a show about somebody being gay, but at the same time their gayness is not like a one-off throwaway like Legend of Korra.
Welcome to Night Vale was a lot of people's first introduction to the indie audio drama sphere. For one fan I talked to, it was also the first media they had come across with a canon queer couple. The precedent that Welcome to Night Vale set in 2012 has had a tremendous impact on both the creative and fan side of the community. Not only has it attracted fans who haven't been able to find their stories told in other mediums, but also it has become almost a given that these shows will have queer representation. These creators know the stories they want to tell, and there's no big boss telling them that they can't.
I think it's because it is so accessible to make. You don't have to like fly things past as many people in order to get it onto the air. And I think that's why Night Vale could have a gay male character in episode 1 before, marriage equality was legalized in the US, because you have a lot more creative control. And I think that when you have more creative control, you get to do stuff that wouldn't fly on like network TV. And that sort of always attracts queer people. They're sort of the first group of folks that get drawn into spaces where you can actually say what you want to say.
Queer representation isn't the only front where the medium is pushing expectations to the side, but it is the one that has been built upon. I know I'm personally hoping to see a little bit better representation of other marginalized groups going forward, and from what I can see and what I've heard from others, we are heading in the right direction. Another aspect to all of this is that because the shows are so niche, as in often horror, very queer, and indie, the fandoms for them are almost based entirely online. Once again, this precedent was largely set by Welcome to Night Vale, whose rise to fame was largely facilitated by Tumblr. Tumblr is still a really significant hub for fandom activity for these shows, but they have also moved on to other platforms such as Twitter, now Blue Sky, Instagram, and TikTok. Largely places like Twitter and Blue Sky and then Instagram are places where people will post their art, people will see the art, say, oh, that looks cool, and then go check out the thing. The same can be said of Tumblr, but a little bit more emphasis is placed on that longer form written content. One of the most significant platforms anymore is Discord, where most shows have their own official servers, and fans often will make their own. There, it's really easy for fans to talk amongst themselves, and sometimes with creators and other people who work on the shows as well. This has allowed for some pretty strong communities to build up, and it's a great way to build connections with other people. I joined the Invictus server a few months ago, and there's a user there who goes by Riot, who gives Patreon memberships to members who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it. In the case of the Invictus Patreon, it allows people who have the membership to access episodes a little bit early, and for some of the tiers you can vote on outcomes of episodes of shows, specifically Malevolent. It's always lovely when I notice Riot give a membership to another unexpected victim. It really just makes my day a little bit brighter every time I see it. Another really neat community that's entirely online is the Podcast Book Club, who is currently running its second ever Pod Jam. And if you're familiar with a game jam, it's like that, but with the first episode of an audio drama. They also, this year, did a podcast convention for the first time, where they had a bunch of people from shows come on and do panels virtually. Their community is primarily through Discord, and it's just a really neat hub for people who enjoy all sorts of different shows instead of one specifically. They have resources for people who want to get into making shows themselves, and lots of space for discussing existing shows. They have creators, they have voice actors, they have all sorts of people on there, and it's just a really, really great way to connect with the community. Like many online fandoms, the ones for audio dramas are globe-spanning. They are primarily concentrated in the US, Canada, and the UK, but that is absolutely far from everyone who enjoys these shows. Through these communities, I've met people from everywhere from my college here in the United States to the UK, Nepal, and Argentina. They truly are global. The specific fan from Argentina I've met is named Danny, and she helped with the Spanish translation of the Magnus Archives. She came across the project one day while scrolling on Tumblr, and she decided to help out. She told me about how they all got together in a group chat on Discord and divided up the episodes amongst themselves. They made spreadsheets to keep track of who had which episodes and certain translations that they were going to use for certain terms for consistency. She was joined by others from Argentina, as well as from Mexico, Peru, and even more countries. Despite the immense geographical difference that separates fans of the shows, there's still a palpable sense of camaraderie in these online spaces. In one way or another, people see themselves in these shows and the stories told, and that draws them together. These fandoms are very small compared to fandoms for larger, more popular pieces of media like Harry Potter and Star Wars. But really, that smallness is part of what makes these spaces so unique and so special to many fans and creators alike. When I was talking to Danny, the final question I asked her was what her favorite part of these communities was. This was her response. The humor, the laughs, the love. The making things as a collective, and how even the individual things get collective the moment they are shared, like breaking a piece of bread over a gigantic table. If you're still here, thanks for watching. I really appreciate you coming with me on this journey. This is my first time ever doing anything like this. This project started out as a feature story I was writing for a journalism class. My professor suggested I get it published, but nowhere really wanted it because it was so broad, which is fair enough. So instead I decided to put a ton more effort into it and turned it into this. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who was willing to talk to me. All the quotes I used today were pulled from interviews that I did, except for the one Instagram ask, but that was also my question that I asked, which was great. Yeah, I did also want to mention everyone I interviewed, all the show creators I interviewed, except for Anna McGuire, are part of the Rusty Quill Network. So that is kind of a bit of a separate, little bubble of this community. So the things I said today might not be totally representative of everyone, but it should be at least pretty close. Genuinely, thank you. Thank you to everyone who talked to me, everyone who let me use their art in this video, and for everyone who makes this a really lovely space to be, both as a fan and as a person. On a different note, I am going to school specifically for media production. I'm hoping to go into audio production for fiction projects. So one of the things I'm currently working on is an audio production of Hamlet, which I'm doing basically to teach myself how to soundscape. So I will be uploading that to this channel when that is ready. I have no idea when that will be. We should be finishing recording probably in the next month or so. But yeah, that's something to keep an eye out for. If you have any suggestions for things you'd like to see from me, any ideas for just stuff to do, those would be greatly appreciated. And until then, thanks for watching.